of the backdrop, but I also don't want it to be washed out. You can see how it looks. Like lighting wise, like I don't have. I can see. Ruthie there.
Yes, ma'am.
Have you heard from the London campus?
Not at all. I'm gonna send an email out to her. I was hoping that's who was calling me. Let me email her. Bridget or Elena, can we get better lighting? It seems dark to me.
No, all the lights are on. I can try adjusting the camera a little bit and see how it changes, but generally this is kind of how it's gonna be.
Okay, because I'm like looking at your face and it's dark.
Let's see. Hey Ruth, is that any better?
Well, good morning, Miss Bridget.
Hi.
Yes, that's better. What is on the screen behind you, Bridget?
Basically, so I could ask other people, but it's just the way it's fallen in recent years.
Yeah, we've got Lee. Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
You're off to
Morning.
but always grateful that you host that industry challenge because you get to see some of the students as well, and they like that sort of thing, and that's worked. We're not asking anybody to put a huge amount. We're not asking people to take some outside of the office. We're just asking them to host the presentation and things like that. So.
There's London. I muted them because they don't realize we're watching them.
We could see it's actually in see the room in there. We don't need to be mic'd because the mic's going to pick up everything.
Yeah, it's very clever these days.
So yeah, we're not doing as much travel.
So you had a presentation for Emma? That's okay, no worries. You want your name to
So does that?
Yeah, no,
No, we get to Sicily.
now it's only really come into something you want to learn. The presentation you want to share. Yeah, it's just massive. And that's
It's noticeable. It's not.
Basically, I can share it with them, but then people. Oh, that's okay. Yeah, you sure?
Let's give it a go. So it was a very
Yeah, it's yeah. There's some of the.
still 35
But it is good. But it means then that. Yeah, that's fine, thank you. It means that they hardly ever get to the business schools. We haven't got any lecturers to go to other parts of the university. But
It's outdoors today, guys. Yeah.
yeah, but it's good. But yeah, Rex plodding along as well. But yeah.
Yeah, the fact you get so many people still, it's really impressive. Everyone seems to think very highly about it. So yeah, that's where you want to be. Yeah, it's we try and take 1 or 2 a year.
Smaller brands, if we don't have technicians. Well, I had a problem this morning at lecture because the sound didn't work, so I eventually found a technician once again. He sorted it, and he didn't even know what was going wrong with it, but you had to keep the mute button on to get the sound. You'd never guess that. Yes. He didn't know that either until he tried. He said, I have no clue why it's doing this.
So we're trying
Modified, go date modified. So I should go the first one.
It's coming along.
Yeah. Don't do the dinner anymore.
No, we stopped to the last dinner.
25 years next year. We might take it over.
We stopped. I think 2019 was the last year we did it. 2018, 2019. But numbers were dropping. Numbers were dropping. It was more of a struggle, and I think there was a point of particular changing a point where.
This is just as you can see, all this is just who the panelists are. It's not anything. I have the agenda for the panel, so I think it's just for here, just to sort of. I've got the hard copy, so I don't need presentation on because I know.
Yeah, and I mean, in a really good year, we
know what
tickets basically just cover the cost of the actual hotel. But from the raffle and the auction, that's where we made money.
Hello.
I always tell the panelists where it's high.
Great. How are you doing? Great.
Good to see you. And they've been doing relationships with various universities. I think the law school has done a relationship with King's College here in London, and then I think some other school has done something with UCL. So we were doing a relationship on the real estate side.
Join, so we can confirm all systems about it.
It sort of makes sense in the sense of
Can we join?
I probably don't want another real estate course in London, so but I don't think they're ever going to open one. But it's a case of
She's recording it
you know,
now at the moment.
having
12th floor and Bridget have joined.
a facility where we can cooperate. Maybe we'll get to an MSc, as I said, global experience where you can do one semester and one semester. Yeah. I don't know what the market for that is. Maybe it's 5 people. The cost of whole residence through the university is probably the same as the cost of whole residence here. So it's just living in New York for weeks. Yeah.
Sorry,
Each other for a long time.
Robert, yeah,
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
when he was at CBRE, I knew Robert. Robert did a lot of alumni.
Yes. Well, he was at Cushman.
Ruth, can you hear me? She's on mute anyway.
I can hear you.
We're surviving, I think it's fair to say. Like most universities in the UK, I think every university in the UK is struggling financially at the moment because of, well, they're not making any money on undergrads. They're not making any money in research. There was a House of Lords report 2 weeks ago which said pretty no university is making money in research, no university is making money on undergrads. The only money they're making is on postgrads.
Everything.
International students, that's pretty much it. But I don't think Reading is where it is. It's
Eamon is very close
Ruth,
to
can
the
you hear
mic.
me?
It's very hard to hear you. Eamon's right next to the mics.
I can hear you. Yeah.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you. Okay, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's just we have people background noise here at the moment.
We're going to do a presentation first, and then we're going to move across onto the Zoom call.
We went to dinner the other day and there's one person in a mask.
Through the screen.
Difficult to have a conversation with.
Yeah, it's only 4 or 5 slides.
Okay.
There's quite a lot of it going around again.
Somewhere else.
Yeah, nothing to worry about. We're literally just now going to do a presentation of 5 slides, and then we're going to join back onto the Zoom call. But the guests are still arriving.
Got it.
It's kind of COVID spacing.
No, it's
To be honest,
They
I mean,
say for that
the
side
only
over
days
this.
to use this whilst talking about the snow.
Just say, everyone said they've got 150 doing master's course now. So when I do it,
Yeah, the evening lecture or tour. Well, you may have done evening lectures as well. You've done. Yeah, yeah.
short COVID.
So you've
We've got to protect our people.
No, I'll get you some tissues. And I think that I'm sure you both met Jane. Who's a careers consultant. She's always saying we need to be careful with the numbers because it's great that we get the revenue, but if they don't get jobs at the end of it,
I will pick it and then give it to you tomorrow.
That's right. Yeah, it's a carry actually.
Carry first. I don't need to care today.
Yeah. No. We might bring it back with the two of us. Yeah, I'll talk to Carrie. Yeah.
Which is understandable in some ways, because you keep trying to keep avoiding groupthink. People have that sort of perception. You've been through that thing.
and there is a bit of a assumption that everybody that comes out really is the same, but that's not necessarily the truth.
So they're in New York, and what is it about?
Coming up for 1 o'clock in the afternoon.
So their lunch hour.
They have a live audience in New York as well, so having looked at their guest list, it looked a more senior audience than what's here. But
Both halves.
I'm moderating both parts. There is a media company they have attached to this who we have, the last time I did something for them, the stuff was appearing in the New York Times and stuff like that. So just to warn you that you may be suddenly appearing in the New York press, which then gets picked up here.
I just need to warn the communications director back.
But then it may not be, you just don't know, as they say.
If you're going to be sitting down, you're not going to be able to see them.
That is true. I can see them here. I have them.
So we're sitting there, are we?
Yeah. You do like a panel on the.
There's three of us.
Yeah, here.
Oh, because you're going to be jumping up and down to that.
No, I'm not going to be jumping. They can hear me. Apparently, the mics are sufficient, so we can.
So what time are we actually starting?
6 in theory, which is 2 minutes.
Somebody asked for two.
Yes,
Very emotional. I tell you, the London real estate market's bad. It's not that. So are we going to be positive, negative, neutral? Confused, yes. Which one do you want to be? Yeah, I'll take one. You say
Okay.
Yeah. So
That's okay. Yeah. Sorry, I was pouring the water from my bowl and it went everywhere. That's water in the bag, and it's only water, so at least we know what it is.
Thank you. So how is the great Mr. Rubrack?
I've not seen him for a little while, but he's still with you, isn't he? Probably actually really during COVID, he decided, I think that's been done.
And I thought he was acting for us.
He's acting for you. He's semi-retired, just run off business. Yeah, he's still kind of in and out. We've probably got about 4, probably going to wait a minute or two, I think, yeah. But he's granddad, enjoying his life. Doing that.
Do you know what? He always, it doesn't change. I mean, he looks the same as I did when I first met him in 1996.
There was a time when he actually had a mild scale of diabetes, which is when he suddenly lost, and we always said that was when it was most fun. And then he lost it, being just because it was like that.
I'm just trying to zoom in a little bit more so they can see you nice and clearly.
He's still doing really well.
I must talk this. Through the COVID period, when I came out of COVID, I didn't get COVID. But the COVID period, I discovered I was type 2 diabetic, which is a bit of a shock and a surprise. So at the same time, I lost about 2 stone without thinking or doing anything about it.
Yeah, so mental.
And they said, yeah, you have great cholesterol's down, your weight's down, it looks fantastic. And it's like, well, I need to do something about it.
Well, he was virgin, so he got that stress. And I think he's avoided it. Oh, good for him. That's a good place to be.
Well, little and large.
Well, it was, it was they've been called much worse, actually. He's now over the road. I've seen him far too much. Yeah. I'm sure he's not going to do anything other than his cars and his own property. Now and again. They mostly have his cars. Have you seen He's got a tank. Showing me a picture of the tank and the Jeep, the Bedford van. He's got the best one was the Triumph Herald, which goes in winter. And they had one, so he bought it on like, there's only a few of them that to exist. And obviously he needed extra parts, so he bought another one. Just as you do. There's one guy who knew how to put it all together in the States, and he got about halfway through and then died. So it was like just only he could go through this kind of alarm. And he eventually got it. I think he used it once. He's now terrified to put it back in the water just in case. Well, you don't want that, do you? You don't. So you can ask this question. Just go on.
What I'm going to do is try to keep to the schedule in the sense of let's start with the current trends and where we are post-COVID and the changing risk environment we find ourselves in, and then let's move on to the future, because the future is really what the seminar is about. So I think that's really what we're trying to do. And then I'm going to ask at the end for where you think these markets are going to be in 5-10 years, and then maybe one takeaway for the future generation, which is in front of you.
Don't go into banking. Don't go into banking. Right, so we got some 12 months. How long you said it's been there 9 months. 9 months. It all feels like you've been there forever.
Nothing in New York yet. I don't see one of the panelists yet.
So we're over there. Basically 3 weeks, and what I didn't tell him was actually that was his wind down. 4 days a week to 3 days a week to 2 days a week to I'm only coming in for 1 day next week and then I'm on. So got to know a bit more, but like all these things, doesn't matter how much you get invested into it. It's when you really start doing it. So it has been a bit of a journey of which way is up over the last 6 months. And now
it's a very different environment from being in the world of real estate services.
They all but for me, it's the difference, Eamonn, is it's a property owner rather than. For me, it's been a huge period of massive team there, isn't it? It's actually quite a lot. Yeah, you got a huge story. I find it encouraged them to. Good Lord. Who let that for you? Probably, yeah. I'll say something abusive in a minute. So, yeah. Neil Ridley. Chelmsford shopping centre. It's one big spot, a great job. Made a bit of money out of it. That's been repeated ever since.
I think let's get everyone sat down, because I think they're waiting for you.
Are they ready to roll in New York? They are. They're all there. Because I only see Michael. I don't see Bob.
He may be, I don't know.
Eamonn, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Bob is there. Anthony is going to do some opening remarks and then we can get started.
Okay, well, we can start. I'll get everybody seated here.
Thank you.
Okay, folks, we're making a start.
Yes, okay. Nice to see you. I've explained why.
Hello and welcome, everybody, both in London, of course, and we have translation services in case you don't understand my accent out in London. I know Eamonn has a very strong Irish accent, so you may not be used to me. Eamonn, how are you doing?
Fine, you can hear me, I hope.
I can hear you perfectly. Miracle of miracles, we managed to get this coordinated across the Atlantic. An incredible debt of gratitude goes to our two experts over here who took time out to attend today, and of course all the attendees. It's very difficult. 1 o'clock is a lunch hour, and I can assure you in this series we're going to screw the London campus, and we're going to do it at a time convenient for us. And Eamonn, you can get up at 11 o'clock at night to have your panelists over there. So the two panelists over here who are going to introduce themselves shortly, Bob Knakal and Michael Davidson, with whom I've had the pleasure of working before. He is no relative, so just in case you think. But the real estate institute has come a long way. We're international. We're very proud that we have a memorandum of understanding with Reading University in England, and of course Henley School of Business and real estate over there, which is arguably the premier real estate program, not only in England and in Europe, but perhaps across the world. Eamonn can speak to that. And I actually attended Reading University for a year, studying land use and management. Attendance record wasn't great, but there we are. But I did do okay. And coincidentally or not, my tutor was somebody called Davidson as well. So I know how to plant the seeds. You're not here to hear me. And in fact, I don't want to hear me, but thank you so much for coming. Spread the word. We have great things coming, not only domestically here in the United States, but also in London. And Fordham has affiliations in Asia and in South Africa and worldwide. And we are a global university and very, very proud to be affiliated with Reading for this event. I will turn it over to you, Eamonn, to have the panelists introduce themselves or whatever you plan on doing. Thank you so much to everybody for coming. It's a great turnout here and there, and I do appreciate it.
Thank you, Anthony, very much. And we've been working on this partnership for well over 12 months, and I'm glad we've delivered it at last. There's been a few bumps in the road, but we've got there. And again, we hope to cooperate on a number of levels between our respective real estate programs. And indeed, from the Henley Business School side, to sort of widen the partnership into the business school, the Gabelli Business School at Fordham as well. So welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming this afternoon to the seminar on a very relevant topic, which seems to be hitting the property press on both sides of the Atlantic almost on a regular basis in terms of looking at the future of office markets in global financial centers. And we're going to get some insights from a very expert panel tonight. I've added this up, but our panelists tonight combined represent 140 years in the real estate sector. I know that sounds quite ominous, but there is a lot of experience here tonight. With me here in London, we've got James Abrahams and Robert Murphy, and our panelists in New York joining us are Michael Davidson, again, as Anthony said, no relationship, and Bob Knakal. I'm going to ask each of the panelists to briefly introduce themselves because I won't do justice to their many accomplishments. They've all sent me bios, but the bios are a page long in all cases, except for Bob, who was very brief about the number of buildings he's sold in his time, which is an all-time record of, I'm going to tell you that piece of information, of 2,283 buildings, which makes him, I think, as he says here, the highest total for any individual broker in the history of the New York market. So that's a record. But I'm going to hand over to James briefly to say a few words about his background.
Thanks, Eamonn. James Abrahams, I work at a company called Allsop. I did the MSc at Reading 24 years ago. And I was just saying to Eamonn, then there were 35 of us. I'm still in contact with about 20 of them on a day-to-day basis. I work in the City of London investment and development side of things, very much specialising in turnaround projects. And I think probably what we're going to talk about today will be quite relevant in what are people looking for going forward.
Thank you, Robert Murphy. So I'm slightly concerned that I represent a large proportion of that 140 years. However, so I graduated from Reading in 1984. And since then, I have spent, give or take, 40 years entirely focused on the London office markets, primarily the capital markets and development in it. 25 years of those were spent with a company called QVRM. The last 10 years with a company called Cushman & Wakefield. And about 8 months ago, I joined the City of London Corporation, responsible for the Square Mile, and I'm the real estate investment director there. Please don't ask me planning questions because I haven't got a clue. Real estate investment. Thank you.
Thanks, Robert. I'm going to hand over to Michael.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be back at Fordham. My name is Michael Davidson. I am New York born and raised, graduated from Fordham up at Rose Hill. Economics and philosophy major. And ever since then, I've spent more or less 32 years in corporate real estate for Morgan Stanley in New York, Tokyo and London, Bank of America, when they built the tower at Bryant Park and acquired Merrill Lynch, JP Morgan for 12 plus years. And over the past year, I've been working with Colliers as a senior advisor to heads of real estate, CAOs, HR professionals on organizational development, real estate strategy, the return to the office, which cannot be escaped in any conversation these days. And it's an honor to be here.
And I'm Bob Knakal. The K is silent, Bob Knakal. I've been a broker selling buildings in New York for 40 years. For 26 of those years, I had my own company, Massey Knakal Realty Services, which I ran with Paul Massey. We sold that to Cushman at the end of 2014. I now run the New York Private Capital Group at JLL and feel very, very lucky. I still love selling buildings as much today as I did 40 years ago when I started, and hope to do it for another 25 or 30 years.
Okay, thank you, Bob. And slight apologies for keeping the K in there as against making it silent, but we know from now on.
No worries. I've been called a lot worse.
We're going to start. Very much the focus tonight is the future, but we better start with where we are and where we find ourselves in office markets post-COVID, but also in terms of the changing risk environment that we're facing, particularly the increases in interest rates and inflation. On top of COVID. So I'm going to ask all our panelists to give some very brief comments about where they think office markets, particularly in London and New York, currently are, both in terms of occupier trends, the return to the office, but also in terms of investment and development trends. So I'm going to turn to James first.
Thanks. It's been a fascinating time. COVID was unexpected. We were having quite an interesting time before that. There was some phenomenal buildings. You only have to walk the streets of EC3 and you see quite a few towers going up, and all of them are letting up really well. There's just a phenomenal kind of return back to really good office buildings, and that's going to be a theme which we probably touch upon quite a lot tonight, which is the difference between grade A and grade B office buildings and what they actually look like. In some ways, it's quite different. I've been very lucky to spend quite a lot of my career playing around in the fringes as well as the core. And when you kind of step back away from what people are looking for today, it actually does look very different to what it did even 5 years ago. The return to the office has been fascinating because I run a very interesting team of leasing gurus, as they call themselves. I call them something else. But we try and design what's next. And we're currently working with some of the best architects delivering some really interesting office space. There's a building not too far away from here, which we work with a private property company to deliver something which is going to be a little bit different. And it's a building before COVID, we were looking at it saying, okay, we're going to get like £50 a square foot for this. Yeah, that's probably it. We then said, okay, what's it going to look like after COVID? People don't want to be quite sitting so close together. They want to be outdoors more. So the first thing that any tenant says to us when they're coming to look at something new is, has it got outdoor space? Can I open the window? And that's the main thing that we've got out of COVID. So we designed something with a roof terrace, a roof garden, and it's got a little kitchen on the roof as well. You can have a little party, you know, those kind of things. It's got terracing pretty much everywhere. We redid the windows to put them almost like this. You've got nearly full height glazing. We took all of the ceilings out, so you've got this feeling of volume and light, and that was really, really important for quite a few people. Because we were one of the first people to do it, we pre-let the whole building. And rather than getting £50 a square foot, we ended up getting 107. And it's the little things which you don't quite appreciate that people really look at. The end of trip, I think everyone probably knows how important it is. But we've seen the difference. The number of people who cycle in on a daily basis is massive. But also public transport. That's another thing as well that you'll notice across London. The most popular spots are around the Crossrail stations, and I'm guessing you probably came here today. Farringdon is probably second actually in terms of popularity to Liverpool Street, which has had a fantastic explosion in terms of where rents are going and who's moving there, the infrastructure that we're seeing kind of come in. The investment market sees this as well, and we have really good visibility. I've got colleagues in Hong Kong, Singapore, all across the Middle East as well, who are saying, okay, what we want going forward is something which is going to be hitting our ESG criteria. And you'll hear about these things. I'm sure you all study it quite a lot when you're doing your masters. But the sustainability point, the future of these buildings is really, really important to investors going forward. They want to future-proof their investment. And I'm sure we'll talk about greenwashing rather than actually providing green buildings. People see through that. But a lot of our investors at the back end, which is really what we're trying to do, we're trying to create investments that someone's going to pay a lot of money for at the end. They've got this at the front of their mind as saying, okay, is it going to be something which is future-proof?
Thanks, James. Robert, your perspectives of where we are.
And I think that I think it's really confusing as to where we are at the moment. And as a start state, that's not a great place to start from. Here we are post-pandemic. If we look at most studies, they will tell you that the office in the city, in London generally, is back up to 30% average occupancy through a week. 60% Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Yeah, only 10% of the office stock in London is not leased. Now, that doesn't seem to be capable in reconcile. If you step back from it a little bit, and I'm sure the guys in New York will comment on this, but in a recent study, London and New York were judged equal in terms of their offer to businesses about the, factors such as innovative ecosystems, the levels of financial activity, the business infrastructure, the resilience of the business infrastructure, the regulatory and legal environments, the talent and skills that are available to work in those businesses. Still only 30% occupancy and 10% vacancy. I'm sure New York has a slightly different perspective on the vacancy. So, but how do you reconcile that? When you see that there's 68% growth in investment in financial and professional services in the city since 2021, I'll try that again. There's 11.6 trillion pounds of assets under management. The levels of activity of business are huge. And yet, despite an identified need for 15 million square feet of new offices over the next 10 years, the supply of new development into the market falls off a cliff in 2025. It virtually runs down to 1 million square feet per year. Unsustainable. It will not meet the demand at any stage. We can talk, as we will do later on, about pricing and yields and interest rates and all that sort of stuff. But actually, the big problem from my perspective is we don't have enough money being invested into development of property to meet what the occupiers want. And nobody really understands what occupiers want at the moment because it's in change.
Thanks, Robert. Michael.
I think, look, I agree with all those insights. And as I step back, you know, name a sector that isn't being disrupted at the same time globally. Office, housing, retail, entertainment. And then you put the filters of climate, technology, capability. And I think there's no wonder that there's a massive disruption happening. And when you then throw in interest rates and inflation, everything else like that, I think the following. I think that real estate, I think today and always has always boiled down to what are the people doing? What are they thinking? Will they show up when we build it? Will they show up when we build a schematic for a new development or a new tower? And I think what has happened by virtue of the past few years is that many organizations have realized they didn't know their people as well as they thought they knew their people. This workforce that we keep talking about. And I think the workforce is awake, which is why they're striking in many parts of the world, and they're demanding more from their employers. And so I think that there are many dislocations that are in the process of getting worked out. I think the good news, despite the sort of the gloom of it all today, in many cases, is that people need live engagement with other people. And that premise, that's like the DNA of real estate, because the spaces we provide count on that. We count on families that want to spend time together. We count on organizations that need to mentor younger people coming up through the organization. We count on people that don't want to stream a concert. They want to go and attend one with 90,000 other human beings. I mean, these are human traits. So I think the inherent humanity and our need for connection with one another is the lifeblood of what we do. As long as we don't panic and flinch in the midst of the current challenges, which I'll leave it to Bob in a moment. I think I'm quite hopeful as long as we keep our eye on the ball and we are prudent in our analytics of what human beings want and need now and going forward, rather than imputing what we want them to want, which is often a trap that we fall into.
Yeah, I agree. And rather than reiterate what's already been said, I'll just go macro a little bit on what's happening in New York and share with you that I think this correction is playing out extraordinarily differently than the corrections of the past. And I'll talk about the three major ones: S&L crisis in the early 90s, the recession in the early 2000s, and then the GFC. In those corrections, every property type was heading in the same direction, heading downward. It was just different level of magnitude that differentiated the product types. Today, we see different product types performing differently. And I would argue that in New York City, the retail market is on the upswing today, but that's because there's been downward pressure on it for 6 or 7 years. So finally it stopped going down, leasing activity is picking up, investor demand is back. The multifamily sector here has tremendous political headwinds, but demand is still robust, which is kind of counterintuitive, but is happening, and there are good dynamics in that sector. The land market is, again, very dependent upon what sector of land you're in. Some are doing well, some are non-existent because of a lack of tax abatement that we have in the city today. So it's our fundamentals within the real estate market are much more highly correlated today to public policy than I think they've ever been. And that's unfortunate. But public policy is having as much impact on the market as real estate fundamentals are. And then the office sector, which is really, from my perspective, the most challenged of all the sectors. I expect every sector at some point next year to turn around in New York, except for the office market. And just to give you, again, a sense from a macro perspective, the dollar volume of sales in Manhattan for sales over $10 million, we're on pace for about $13.9 billion of sales activity this year, which would be down 34% from where we were last year. Number of properties sold is on pace to only be down 20%. So these reductions are not as cataclysmic as you would think, based on the psychological energy that exists in the marketplace today. But I will tell you that we're on pace for those numbers to be down much more substantially from the peak. The number of properties sold is on pace to be down 56% from the peak, and dollar volume down 77% from the peak. So we are challenged. And then the office sector, I see it really as two very distinct markets. There's new construction Class A office, which is a very, very different product than we've ever seen before. And that market seems to be doing fairly well. Very good tenant demand, rents are very high, occupancies are good. And then there's everything else, and everything else is having challenges. And that's notwithstanding how much money you put into an older office building. You can't change ceiling heights and you can't take columns out. And there are things that you just can't possibly do to make an older building competitive with new construction. So we're really seeing the office sector dovetail into two very distinct asset classes, new Class A and everything else.
Thank you for that. And thank you all our panelists for their perspectives on where we are now. We're not going to focus on the future, and the future is always difficult. And we need some sort of tangibles. And I'm going to start with asking our panelists in terms of what we often describe as the sort of global megatrend impacts on space. Things like technology. How is that changing our demand for space? Climate change, the whole transition to net zero in terms of buildings which are there or buildings which are not there. And again, that's probably part of this dual market that we're seeing, certainly in terms of where tenants and occupiers want to be versus where they don't want to be. And the other part of this is the sort of changing world of work. You know, people working 3 days in the office, 2 days at home. The office is a workplace. I know Michael's in particular is an expert on this. But the whole issue of, you know, making conducive workplaces where people want to be becomes more important than ever in the world that we find ourselves. So those starting with those three mega trends: the changing world of work, the changing perspectives of occupiers, the impact of technology on all of this and where we can work, where we want to be, the physical implications for physical space, and of course climate change, the whole issue of the transition to net zero and where tenants want to be and don't want to be. So I'm going to start with James to give us a quick perspective on those three mega trends which are shaping the future set of opportunities we're seeing in the office market.
Great, thanks. Quite lucky that we have visibility into lots of different sectors within the City of London and the West End in particular. Our market's really been driven by the legal sector. They've taken so much new space. And I think there was an element of trying to get people back into the office. You know, lawyers have really been quite resistant. A lot of them were at best 3 days a week in, most, and still are. You know, the property sector, from where we see it, we love seeing people talking. You know, we are people who need to bounce ideas off each other. We're quite creative, and that involves actually sitting with people and actually talking through things. My office are in 5 days a week, and you know, if they could, they come in at weekends. That's not true, so yeah. But you know, generally speaking, you know, to get people back into the office, you have to be able to offer them more. And when you look at what's actually been taken up in terms of the new office space coming through, majority of it has been the legal sector. We've also done a lot of the kind of TMT market through Shoreditch, Whitechapel, all the warehouse conversion. We did a lot of that work you know, from the early noughties all the way through to just before COVID. And when you go in there, those were the guys who had the big headphones on. They've got their laptop, didn't really look left or right. They've been very happy at home. They've been very productive. Until recently, when mental health kicks in and they start to realize, okay, efficiency isn't everything. I need to sit and talk to people, and you know, we're missing out on things here. So we're starting to see the emergence of that coming back into the office, into the city market in particular. When you talk about technology, though, when you walk around buildings, they look relatively similar. You know, they've still got a ceiling, they've still got toilets, still got floors. But there is a difference, and you'll see quite a lot of the new buildings that have gone up. Things like 22 Bishopsgate got incredible technology behind it. It's something called smart technology, which runs the building. It is a lot more efficient. It's about lights going off and on when people walk in. The way that air handling works, you know, it's very important, and that whole zero
carbon, the whole sustainability doesn't just come from the developers, it actually comes from the tenants and what the staff are saying to them. Yeah, these things are important. You know, they are. You have a big corporate like KPMG, they've got responsibilities and so forth, but their staff want to know that, you know, that they're taking things seriously, and it is a major push point for us. I'll pass it to you, Robert.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I think if we turn the heating up and put some showers in, we might see more people in the office over the winter, energy costs and all that sort of thing. But sorry, that's slightly facile comment. But for me, the issues going forward is what is the purpose of the office? And, you know, why would people come into the office? They're not going to come in to sit at a desk, look in front of them and do the same things they could do at home. Why bother? You know, you've got to come in for collaboration, for perpetuating the culture of the business, for giving people the opportunity to engage with their seniors who are going to take promotion decisions. Somebody described it once as, if you want a job, work from home. If you want a career, come in the office, which I think is probably a nice way to express your impact as an individual in an organization. The organizations themselves, they need people to engage, to perpetuate and hopefully create what's going forward. I must admit, I misread the technology point. What's the impact of technology? Because I read it as what's the impact of AI?
Yeah, that's a good way of
the impact.
It's a very open point.
And I think it's a really, it's a question for all of us, and we'll find our way through it. But it's all very well to talk about AI and say that's going to replace that person or that person, and that job's not going to exist anymore because ChatGPT will do it. But actually, who's managing the AI? Who's making the human judgment decisions that come out of the AI? So I think how we engage with that sort of technology is going to be quite an interesting exercise and evolving experiment for all of us over the next few years. But inevitably, it will change the way we use the office space. I was just also going to agree with the guys in New York there that the bifurcation between good quality and not good quality is almost absolute. You're either in space that's going to work for the future or you're not. And that space has got to be used for something else. But the bit which I'm really interested in that piece is the rise of super prime rents. People are paying huge amounts to get the property they want. And provided it's meeting all those standards that James was talking about, green, neighbors, well, BREEAM outstanding, all those sorts of things. And it's got a terrace and a bit of open space and so on and so on. And people are paying huge amounts of rent. You know, it doesn't make any sense at all. Is that the new standard for what we need to produce in terms of supplying property into the market? I'll stop at that point.
Okay, thanks, Robert. Michael, your perspectives.
I think another great segue. So I think from a technology perspective, technology has been disrupting us from an occupancy point of view for years and years and years, well before the pandemic. Even if you look at corporate occupancy levels in quote unquote fully occupied buildings that were leased up, listen, between 2008 and 2019, you know, we were observing occupancy levels on a day-to-day basis between 65 and 70%, although we had full occupancy. And I think that what the pandemic did was it did two things. It proved to the world how productive, quote unquote, they could be remotely. Many companies thrived in that environment. They started to question the level of investment. And especially if you look at that, let's say daily 30% float that you spend on capital, rent, and fully loaded costs to keep that space that sits vacant, that spurs all of the questioning that's happening today. So to some of the points that have been made, current day, there's a flight to quality. So if we don't need as much, let's keep the best or go to where the best is located and dispose of the rest out of older buildings, what Bob had said. I think also that if you look at the holistic experience for an average employee, what's in an employee experience? If I'm going to commute, now I know the cost of commuting because I know how much I save by not having to do it. Is my company compensating me fairly? Or are the profits and windfalls going to leadership as they have for the past 1,000 years, frankly, from a sociological perspective? well, wait a minute, is it safe? It might be safe in certain communities around the world, but if the average worker wakes up in the morning, turns on the news and hears about a stabbing, a shooting, someone's pushed in front of a subway, or there's an accident somewhere uptown or downtown in centers that we would consider safe normally, well, that average worker might say, you know what? I look at my family and I'm going to work from home today. Because even if it was safe on my commute, it doesn't feel that way. And I think how people feel about the employee experience is coming home to roost. Not the last point, but a point is that I think that leadership of companies and what we call management of people needs to step up. I think there's a leadership vacuum, and that people need leadership, and they don't want to show up at an office and be on video calls that they could have done at home, which is often a dilemma. Like, where are the leaders? Where are my colleagues? Why did I come here today? And I think that everyone needs to step up and lean into that scenario to make the holistic employee experience worthwhile. And I think in many ways, and this isn't self-congratulatory to the real estate industry, I think the real estate industry in many cases, in the spaces and innovations and how they're constructed and strategized, has often been way ahead of how companies themselves treat and operate around their workforce. And so I think all of that has to meet in the middle for this puzzle to come together.
Thanks, Michael. Bob.
Yeah, so three very interesting topics. I'll just share with you my experience with the pandemic. As a broker, my number one goal for my entire career was to get 50 property owners on the phone every week and get around to asking them if there was anything they wanted to sell. During the pandemic, I'm working from my country house up in Connecticut, and I'm routinely making 100 connections a week. And I figured, you know what? I'm so much more productive because if any of you are the TV show Seinfeld fans, Jerry talks about the stop and chat. And people stop, they ask you how your weekend is. Before you know it, 8 minutes have gone by. And I figured out my productivity was lacking because of the stop and chat. So I'm much more mindful of keeping that conversation to 2 minutes rather than 8 today. But routinely making 100 connections a week. And I said, I'm never going back to the office. I'll go back 1 or 2 days a week. That's it. Well, P.S., I'm back in the office 5 days a week. And I feel that it's just so comfortable for me. And maybe that's because I've been doing it for so long. And I just don't know any better. But I think the return to work is important for 2 main reasons. One, to have a company culture where you feel like you're part of something and you feel like you're connected. It is absolutely essential to be in the office and to be with people. Secondly, I think the biggest victims of the work from home process have been younger people. You can't learn, you learn more as a younger person about business from being in the ecosystem of the office and running into things inadvertently. You're getting a cup of coffee. You're even in the men's room. You overhear things about a deal, about how somebody handles something. That educational experience is so vitally important. And so the learning curve, I think, is relatively flat for people who are spending their life on Zooms, because you talk about the topic you're on the Zoom for, and there's nothing else discussed. So I think the debilitating impact that this has had on younger people is going to be significant. And this has gone on now for years. And so I feel bad for them that they didn't have the benefit of being in the office to get in the way of all that information to help them grow much more quickly. With regard to technology, technology is changing so rapidly. It's amazing. I'll take you back to 1984. I'm sitting at my desk. I have no computer, no fax machine, no cell phone. Carried a roll of quarters in my pocket to go to the corner and put it in a payphone to call somebody if they didn't show up for a meeting. The world is completely different. And I will tell you that change that's happened over 35 or 40 years is going to be exceeded by what's going to change in the next 5 years, given what's happening with technology and AI. I feel like I'm starting my career all over again. I just have an advantage against other people who are starting their careers today because I have a 40-year track record behind me. But the fact is, I'm starting over today. I'm applying AI. I'm studying AI. I'm figuring out how to make AI impact my business. And it's remarkable what it can do. So I think we're in a whole new world. Things are changing so rapidly. And lastly, with regard to the environment, I will tell you, we have what's called Local Law 97 here in New York, where buildings are supposed to comply with carbon emissions, et cetera, and things like that. I will tell you that the overwhelming majority of owners, particularly of office buildings today, are not giving Local Law 97 a second thought, even though this is going to raise about $900 million in penalties and fees. I view it more as just another tax as opposed to a real drive to try to make this city carbon neutral. But I will tell you that owners of office buildings today are not giving it a second thought because they don't know if they're going to own their building or whether the bank is going to own the building by the time you have to comply with the law. So they're trying to figure out, am I still going to be the owner when I'm supposed to comply with this? And why the heck would I put more money into the building to make it carbon neutral when I may not be the owner in a year or two?
Thanks, from very excellent perspectives there. I'm not going to move on to some of the sort of issues we've sort of touched on. I know Bob touched on this issue of sort of governance, urban governance, in terms of being an important, or public policy being an important driver of where the market is in New York. Part of what we've talked about is the fact that there are winners and losers from this. There is space to be repurposed, and how that might be repurposed. I've seen some research actually on that this week coming out in the UK market, suggesting offices could be repurposed for residential, as an illustration. And the sort of locations, because again, both London and New York have a number of key locations, a number of peripheral locations, but who are going to be the winners and losers in terms of the micro locations of these changes? So I'm going to start with James.
Yeah, it's a fascinating topic, this one. What Robert was saying before about the amount of space coming through over the next 5 to 7 years is quite concerning. We've got a massive supply constraint coming forward. A lot of that is because it goes through various different things, but Brexit was a big issue in the fact that we lost everyone who could build things, and labour price went right up. But the other one is planning. Planning is good and bad. And part of the reason that we get rental growth is because the fact that buildings don't get built quick enough. The stats actually over the next few years are very concerning. I think next year is about 1 million square feet, which is going to be delivered. And to put that into context, just the city alone, we need between 5 and 5.25 million square feet every year for lease expiries or for new entrants. You know, it's a huge issue that we've got going forward. And especially where we've got a lot of people who are wanting to pay for the best buildings because they want to get their staff back into the office. It's a big thing. When you actually, there's a couple of examples which I just want to touch on. In the press, there was the Marks and Spencers on Baker Street. That's a great example in the fact that you've got a really nice looking building, but I've been in that building. Behind the windows there is just a rabbit warren of a department store, which is not really usable for anything else apart from being a department store. But then you also get the Debenhams, which is literally just down the road on top of Bond Street Station. What they've done with the Debenhams is keep 2 facades, completely drop it behind it. It's currently about halfway through construction, but they can provide big floor plates in the West End. And we believe that that will be pre-let 3 or 4 times over by the time it's finished. To not do that with the M&S is a real shame. And I think there's a happy compromise in there somewhere. Unfortunately, they've put it on hold, and it's been on hold for some time. But it's not just that one as well. The ITV Centre on the South Bank, phenomenal scheme. That's a Japanese capital coming into London. It's a building which should be built because we know that the demand is going to be there. And when they actually started looking at it in terms of timing, it would be spot on in terms of hitting that supply constraint as well. Another one is stuck in the planning system, and hopefully we'll see that kind of released over the next few months. We're quite lucky to have Robert here because obviously he's much closer to that in the City of London than I am. But one of the things I will say is that when you talk about obsolete buildings with too tight floor ceiling height, the ability to change these things into residential, probably not in the city, but certainly service apartments, hotels, all of those things, what they do is they bring a lot more life in. They bring amenity, they bring restaurants, they bring 7-day trade. And I think that that's something which is actually very exciting for the City of London moving forward, without impacting on the long-term office space that development needs that we're going to need.
Thanks. I'm going to hand over to Robert. I know when we were talking last week, we mentioned Canary Wharf quite a bit in terms of the winners and losers. But again, your perspectives on this.
I'll touch on that. I'll touch on that in a moment. As I said at the outset, I'm not involved in the planning process within the corporation. But I did ask them some questions about how is, what's the evolution of planning in the city. And it's interesting, isn't it? It really adds to this conundrum about development and what's the aspiration and what's the reality. There's 1.26 million square meters. So that's 12.6 million square feet of planning consents granted in the last 12 months in the City of London. Applications in the last 6 months are up 25%. But I said what I said earlier on about delivery over the next few years. There's been a 37% fall in the construction starts in the last 6 months compared to the same period last year. The principal problem being funding. People can't find the money to be able to undertake their development despite huge demand. I sort of wonder whether that will change a bit, because London has enjoyed some attraction as a safe haven for capital when there's uncertainty in the rest of the world. And whilst that uncertainty is very sad for every single part of the world that is suffering from it, London does seem to benefit from that uncertainty as people look to protect their wealth. That uncertainty seems also to be undermining the confidence in the businesses that occupy space as well, because there's been a slowdown in pre-letting of accommodation, whereas the lead-in time to pre-letting was running out to about 3 to 4 years in some cases, before buildings even started. Now it's a real struggle to get a pre-let over the line, even after you started building it. So there seems to be different seismic forces at play in that sort of market. But when you delve down into the buildings that need to be supplied, the ambition for carbon zero and the timetables we're talking about, well, the UK government seem to be playing around with that. But taking our New York friend's point earlier on, I think investors and developers are seeing through the government's minimum energy requirements. So EPC C by 2027, EPC B by 2030. It's almost irrelevant, because the people who are building new buildings just know they need to go to a higher standard still to meet what occupiers want and what the institutional investor will want if they ever come back. And so the worry factor is all those buildings. And again, like our friends in New York, there are people out there who will not spend the money on refurbishing their buildings, will not spend the money on bringing things up to meet, and those buildings will go to a different use. Question mark, what's that use going to be? So if we just take a segue into the future, I see a far more mixed use city of the future. And then finally, the point about Canary you raised, Eamonn. So I think it's fascinating how the commercial and economic geography of London is changing, has been changed and is changing by Canary Wharf. So I've always regarded Canary Wharf as a bit of a safety valve for surfeit of demand compared to the supply that can be generated in the City or South Bank or West End. And for 30, 40 years, it's done just that. If you wanted big space, that was the place to go. Now the planning in the City and the West End, Southwark and Tower Hamlets and Islington has got into good shape, and they can produce the buildings they want, or modern occupiers want. They're not as big as the ones in Canary Wharf. They've got big floor plates, but they're not as big as those, because people don't want 1 million square feet buildings anymore. So we're seeing that retrenchment happening back into the traditional CBD areas. Example is Clifford Chance, the example is HSBC returning to Canary, and we will see more. So suddenly, what's been built in Canary, 30 million square feet of offices, nobody wants to be there. So what's going to happen to it? Who knows? But interestingly, that takes 30 million square feet out of the pipeline of available offices. So sort of London's in balance between demand and supply. I think it's an interesting moment, but I don't see Canary lasting for much longer as 30 million square feet of offices. And we've seen their investors, Brookfield and QI, have just allocated £400 million towards changing some of those properties.
Thanks, Robert. Michael.
Another, I like your sequence. It's consistent and it's working. Look, I think the world's cities, the world's urban and suburban centers are more or less based on the architecture of 1850 to about the year 2000, when humans and how they lived and worked and interacted and commuted were predictable. So you could build shopping centers and you knew they were going to be fine for a while, and you could build neighborhoods and developments and highways, train stations, subways, because it was relatively predictable. You knew the human race was growing rapidly and you kind of knew how they were going to behave and where they were going to work. That all changed. I think if there's anything to what everyone has said, all of these factors have to be considered in unison. Labor, jobs, migrations, office, every sector. In some ways, if you have a strong stomach, it's an urban planner's paradise for the next 10 to 20 years, because so many assumptions that drove that original architecture of how we live and work and play is up for grabs and changing rapidly. And so again, I'm hopeful because I know the human race keeps coming back together because we need to. We don't work well in isolation. But I do think that our leaders politically, governmentally, the leaders of corporations, leaders in real estate that can guide many of these decisions in terms of where investments are made, a commitment to the environment. And, you know, when it comes to the environment and climate change and local laws, you know, Mother Earth has the final vote in all matters from what I can see in the papers. We can hem and haw, and we can comply or not comply, and we can save ourselves a few shekels or a few bucks here and there because I'm not going to pay this because I don't know who's going to own the building. But you know what? Mother Earth is going to have the final vote, and it will be a hurricane or an earthquake or a volcano or a fire, and we will learn our lesson slowly and surely over time, unless we work together to shift a lot of these dynamics and integrate. And so I think there's hope for our centers in cities and neighborhoods, et cetera, if we work together and we don't allow ourselves to be divided. So I think to come back to what I did for 30 years for companies, look, the strategies that we created require deep integration with myriad businesses and functions in order to give the requirements to the real estate community that had to get solved for. If I missed something, if I missed a business or a wrong assumption on a function in any company, you know, it wasn't long before we were found out that the strategy was flawed. And so I think the landscape now is even more challenging. I think people have to get out of their silos. And I think we have to realize that we have a broad common ground, and a lot of these roads meet in the real estate industry and how we build, how we renovate, and how we house humanity. You know, just the sheer 30,000-foot dislocation of the amount of vacant structures we have on Earth and the amount of people we call homeless. That in itself is a rallying cry that we have to together work to solve.
Yeah, Mike, I think that's a great point. And just to give some perspective on New York City, you know, every commercial brokerage firm has a different calculation for how many square feet of office space we have. It's somewhere between 400 and 500 million feet. Vacancy today is 18%. So that's 72 to 90 million feet of vacant space. There's 19.7 million feet of new office under construction. There's 22 million feet that has been purchased by developers or is owned by developers. That's in the planning stages. They're looking for an anchor tenant to get going. And if the new world of hybrid work, working from home, whatever, if that reduces aggregate demand by another 10%, which is probably very conservative, We're talking about 125, 150 million feet empty. So something has to be done. We have a tremendous housing issue here. There's not nearly enough housing at all strata of the socioeconomic spectrum. We need the housing desperately, and every one of our politicians says, you know what, we want New York to be more affordable for everybody. Every single piece of legislation that has been implemented or ignored since 2018 has done nothing but constricted supply and exerted upward pressure on rents. So what our politicians are doing is exactly the opposite of what they say they want to do. I had lunch with the governor a few months ago, and I told her to implement a 421G tax abatement policy citywide. The 421G tax abatement was something that was used downtown after 9/11. It actually existed before 9/11, but after 9/11 really started to get used much more frequently. At 9/11, there were 1,800 dwelling units in the financial district of Manhattan. There's almost 30,000 units down there today, all precipitated by this tax abatement program. Older, obsolete office buildings can be converted into residential. Architects are coming up with very, very creative ways to get natural light deep into dense floor plates. But what is going to happen, I think there will be some conversions of office to residential, but the price of office buildings, especially secondary and tertiary office buildings, is getting to the point, it's the same price per square foot that it was 20 or 25 years ago. And it's heading down. And what you will see, I predict that at the end of this cycle, when we get through this whole process, there will be more office buildings that were demolished than converted because of you can't do certain things to certain buildings. You look at a building, there's a building at 40th and Broadway now that was purchased by a large multi-billion-dollar fund for over $600 million. They lost it to the bank. It just went on the market for $90 million. $125 a foot. This is a big building. It's going to cost probably $150, $200 a foot to knock it down. But the combination of that is lower than land value. That 650,000 foot building, I bet you will be demolished to make way for new construction. But that is going to happen routinely because of the cost and the complication of converting these older buildings to alternative uses. So I think if you look at the landscape in the city, 25 years from now, if you looked at what the city looks like, I don't think we would recognize it. There'll be going to be so much new construction. And we've seen this in residential condominiums. New construction prices keep going up. People are moving from older co-op buildings into new condo buildings. You see the strength of the new construction office sector. Everybody wants new, whether it's to live in it, to work in it, to play in it. I think there's going to be a mass of new construction of all types in the city, and we won't recognize it. 25 years from now, you're going to look at what the city looks like today and say, wow, those are the old days. Look how different the city is today.
Thanks for a very positive trajectory on where we're going. I'm going to try to bring the panel to a close because I'm conscious of time, and I'm going to ask each of the panelists to give us some insights in terms of future opportunities, where they think the future opportunities are, and also to give us a takeaway on this topic. Certainly in London tonight, we've got a very youthful audience in front of us, a lot of people embarking on their careers in real estate. So some words of wisdom from the accumulated 140 years of experience which are with us tonight would be very useful. So future opportunities and some takeaways and advice to certainly the audience here in London, and I'm guessing in New York you also have some people in the audience who again are starting their careers in the real estate sector. So James.
I think it's fairly obvious for what I'm looking at over the next 3 to 5 years. We've just seen land values and vacant properties just tumble in value. There's a very live opportunity at the moment which is going on in the middle of the city, and we pulled out our offer for this building 3 years ago, and we offered 105 million for it, and it's just got under offer at 23. And you kind of see, okay, that's nearly a 70% drop in value. When we look at land, when land is transacted in the city, it usually is in a downturn. And I have to say, we've looked at quite a lot of land transactions, even when Walkie Talkie and the cheese grater and 22 Bishop Street, all of those were traded pretty much in a downturn. And those land values kind of kick around kind of like 250 pounds a square foot, that kind of territory. It got up to about 350 for a minute, and then it's just tumbled again. And we are looking at land values now in the region of 75 to maybe 125 pounds a square foot. And those are the kind of things that we're spending a lot of time looking at. Yeah, repositioning buildings, looking at planning, but ultimately just buying land, because they always say buy land, they're not making any more of it.
And your takeaway?
My takeaway is pretty much what has been echoed in New York and hopefully here as well, is that tenants love new buildings, and we're looking at a real of all the towers that got built in the city. From what we've worked out, there's about 35,000 square feet available today. That's it. And they've all gone. You build it, you can pre-let part of these things. There's still quite a few major requirements around. One of the ones that were brought up earlier, though, was, and this is a really interesting fact, Clifford Chance moved from their Canary Wharf headquarters. They took a pre-let of a phenomenal building, which GP are delivering in the middle of the city. When you actually speak to them, though, they're not going to make a lot of money on it. That's a real issue, because it does stop people taking on these big projects. It's a 20-year lease to a Magic Circle law firm. They're paying a great rent. The cost of doing it is very, very punitive. But then where we are in terms of exit yields at the moment means that the end value doesn't quite stack up to be able to push that button to actually say, okay, guys, get on with it. So that's why I think land banking is good fun.
Thanks, Robert.
So
opportunities in a takeaway.
Yeah, so the opportunities, I think, are in that growth of a mixed use ecosystem across the central business districts. I think we will see more academic institutions, which reinforces the talents and skills of the people who might work in those CBDs. I think as we increase the residential proportion, because they need to be in there, we'll see support services to residential, like hospitals. And that probably links back into the academic side of life as well. So I think that whole mixed use environment means there's a huge opportunity to actually get ahead of that game and not place that reliance upon just another commercial office being developed. I acted for something called the Cleveland Clinic to open their first hospital in London. It's $1 billion investment, not a little toe in the water, just so complete immersion. They are overwhelmed already with demand for their services. Just one example. So mixed use environment.
Thanks, Robert.
My takeaway?
Your takeaway?
Somebody's not going to like this. Don't plan a career based on being a broker. AI and technology is going to get ahead of you.
We may have a different perspective on that takeaway from New York. Michael, your opportunities and takeaway.
I'm going to go to Bob on that one, but thanks for giving him a few extra minutes to think through.
Absolutely. I have to put my boxing gloves on, I think.
Yeah. So I'll put the buffer in this fund. So I think from a couple of perspectives, number one, as we reinvent and rebuild new structures with new technology, because people want new. They want new offices. They want new homes to live in. They want them fit with all the latest amenities, services, technology. My hope is that at that macro level, the sprint to rebuild so many parts of our cities and the earth itself are somehow mitigated by the efficiencies of green energy. Because as we know, planet Earth, when you build, let's say, a state-of-the-art green building with all the bells and whistles, it may help the earth in the long run, but it doesn't help the earth in the short run. You still have to mine and manufacture and ship steel and do all the things that the earth is agnostic to. So that's number one, is I hope that our drive for new, our sheer drive for immediate gratification and consumption, which the younger generations are accustomed to. They don't have to go anywhere to get stuff. They can just click and get it and buy it. I hope all that's mitigated by the efficiencies and productivities that we're bringing to market. I think from a more human side, inside of companies and organizations that buy and develop and run these buildings, you know, I hope that the leaders of tomorrow once again become the teachers rather than leadership for their own sake, leadership for their own gratification, for their own glory, that they realize that they have an enormous generation, what Bob and others have said. There's an enormous generation coming out of primary schools and colleges that missed a lot in the last 5 years. And I think if leaders don't see themselves as mentors again, as servant leaders for a generation that will one day inherit all the things that we give them, that's my hope on the human side. And I do think, and I'm hopeful overall, is that we will keep coming back together. I just hope that our coming together is productive and healthy and bears fruit rather than conflict, frankly, because amid everything that we're talking about, no matter how smart we are, no matter how wealthy we are, no matter how much we impress ourselves with what we build and develop, if we aren't getting along on a macro and micro scale, it won't really matter because we'll just tear it back down at the end of it all. So my hope is really in the humanity that's going to drive this clock going forward.
Well, Michael, that's a great point. Tough to follow up on that one, but Robert, I have to address what you said, and I'm not going to come back at you too hard. I do actually believe what you said to some degree. I think that you know, some kid in college will do a thesis on investment sales brokerage, and I think you'll look back and say that from 2003 to 2020 was the golden age of real estate brokerage. And not to say that it's not going to go away, but I think that what technology will do is it's going to marginalize the broker in the future to some degree, because from a broker's perspective, and as a broker who sells buildings, there are two main functionalities. One, find the buyer. Two, negotiate the transaction. Because buildings are not widgets, the negotiating of the deal is not going to be replaced by AI. The finding of the buyer may very well be. So I think what will happen is that the industry will become more of a consulting business than a brokerage business, but there'll still be a need for it. And so that being said, I would say that particularly for the young people out there, and Eamonn, you said there's a lot of young folks in the audience there. I've seen a lot of people come and go through this business. In the 26 years that we ran Massey Knakal, we had over 2,000 people come and go. And I'm proud to say today there are 29 investment sales businesses or divisions of businesses in New York that are run by people who learn the business at Massey Knakal. But I will tell you, the people who succeed the most in the real estate business are people with desire and discipline. You have to have desire. You have to be disciplined. And Abraham Lincoln said that discipline is choosing between what you want now and what you want most. So to the young people out there, what do you want most? What do you want most? Do you want to be a very, very successful real estate professional? Or do you want to work from home in your pajamas or your sweats and just get on your Zoom? Don't do it. Get into the office. You're going to get more just by being in that environment. You're going to learn more than you ever could on hundreds of Zooms. So if you really want to be successful, you have the desire to be successful, have the discipline to get into the office. It will change your life.
Very good words of wisdom. I'm going to bring the panel to a close. I think it's been an excellent panel. We've covered quite a lot of topics, very wide topics on this broad theme of the future of the office. I'm going to call on my colleague, Gianluca McCarter, who's here, who's our head of department, to say a few words of thanks on behalf of Henley. So, Gianluca, would you like to join us at I think if you join at the lectern, everybody will see you.
Thanks a lot to everybody. But most of all, I'd like to thank also Eamonn here for his work in achieving this agreement between the two universities. When I started to become head of department, one of the goals I had was to link ourselves with international institutions and then to link ourselves more with business. I think that tonight everything is happening in one go. So in a sense, it's a real pleasure for me to have witnessed what is happening here. And I'm looking forward to meet also our partners in New York. I'm going to go there in January, and so hopefully I'll go there. Thanks a lot to the panelists, very insightful views. And I guess that the words of wisdom touch me a lot, because at the end of the day, if we are here, both us in the university, but also people in business, and then you students, is also because we share this passion. And I think that to have a forum where we can share and then learn from each other, then it's fantastic. So thanks a lot again, and looking forward to meet our counterpart in New York. Thank you.
Thanks. Hosting here. Myself and Anthony have talked about this, and this is the first. We're hoping to maybe have this sort of annual Fordham Reading industry seminar. This is the start of something we hope which will continue into the future. As John Lucas said, it's bringing together business in particular and reaching out to the new generation which is in front of us. So again, a big thanks to James and to Robert here, to Michael and to Bob in New York. Is Anthony still with us? Does he want to say a few words?
Yeah, he's approaching the mic.
That's good, because Anthony is visiting us next week in Reading, so I will see Anthony on the 2nd of November in person, but he may want to say a few words at this inaugural event for our partnership.
I actually don't want to say any words, but since you called upon me, I would like to thank all the panelists once again for very insightful words, both INSIGHT and INCITE, as in insightful. And you're going to plead the cause, right? You're not going to let those things just go with that very, very, very compassionate answer.
Absolutely.
It was really very informative, and I thank everybody for coming, both here in New York and in London. And Eamonn, I look forward to seeing you next week.
Same, and we've got a recording of this, so we'll probably try to make that available through our alumni. And again, thanks to our colleagues from Reading Real Estate Foundation for helping with this side of it. And all I can say is our colleagues at Fordham have supplied some hospitality at the back of the room, and please enjoy the hospitality, and we have some time for networking. So thanks from this end. And Anthony, thanks from the New York end. So
Eamonn, you just buggered me. We provided refreshments only for the London people, not for the ones over here. Now what am I going to do?
It's lunchtime in New York. You won't have to go back to the office.
You don't need refreshments, you need lunch. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Take care. All the best.
Get the recording. I think we can organize the recording to be made available, because there was a lot of interesting topics there. So thank you all.
Of you, yes. Okay.
Thanks. And thanks to our IT support here as well. It's self-service at the back. You just take what you'd like, and we're going to be here. I don't know whether you have to walk away straight off, but you may be able to have a chat to some of our new generation.